Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're delighted to have you with us. I'm Stacy Palmer, CEO of the Chronicle of Philanthropy, and I'm joined by my colleague, Drew Lindsay, who oversees the Commons. And we have lots to share with you today about what's coming up this fall. One of the things we're looking at, as we know, everybody in the nonprofit world is thinking about what election season is going to mean for nonprofits, for the missions that they want to accomplish, and for how our society works together to make change happen. So we thought this was an ideal time for us to start a new series of conversations that you can join us for. They're going to be quick and easy to listen to with some terrific experts. But first, I'd really love to tell you a little bit more about what the Commons is all about. It's a new project that the Chronicle of Philanthropy launched, and Drew Lindsay has been leading that work, really focused on how we provide new ideas, new solutions, and new conversations about how we can deal with the fractured divides that are really keeping us from getting things done. Drew, can you tell us about the Commons? What is it? What kinds of materials are you providing? Who are you talking to as part of your work to put this together?
Sure. Thank you, Stacy, and thanks everyone for joining us here today. You know, as Stacy knows, I can talk at length about the Commons, and I want to make this as tight as possible, really. So the Commons, as you're seeing on the screen, is a dedicated platform, digital platform. It's meant to be a home for a lot of coverage, news coverage, but also commentary and conversations in which Chronicle writers, explorers, and outside writers and people in the field explore the country's divides. And when I say divides to people in conversation, immediately their mind goes to politics, and that's understandable given the heavy political season we're in and what's going on with that. But I just want folks to understand that what we're doing is looking at divides in all walks of life. We're really looking at divides along the lines of income, race, gender, really so many things. We just had a terrific roundtable conversation, I'll say just a couple of weeks ago, in which we brought together some young nonprofit leaders. And they talked about the generational divides that are getting in the way of their work. They're coming to nonprofits with attitudes and new ideas and ways to change, and they're not being received well by their older colleagues, and that's causing some friction. So we looked at those generational divides that cause problems. Now we're doing this, as Stacy suggested, because funders are telling us that the divides are getting in the way of their work. They're having trouble building coalitions broad enough, building enough of a power base to get things done that they want to get done. So we feel like this is a really opportune time and a really valuable resource for folks who are trying to bridge these divides and get things done for the common good.
Are there any particular stories that you think that stand out for people who haven't really dipped into the Commons? Are there things that you'd recommend as a few starter pieces?
Sure. And let me just give you a broad sense of what we're doing in the sense of our approach to coverage. We want to look both with an external lens and an internal lens. Externally, we're talking about what are funders doing in the country? What are they funding? What kind of work are nonprofits pursuing to try to bridge these divides and close these gaps? How do they hope to make a difference? And is it realistic to expect them to make a difference? And one story I'll give an example about is we did a recent piece on a new $50 million funder collaborative that's making a pretty rare big investment in rural America. That's a divide unto itself, both philanthropy, which tends to be urban, and rural America, which probably doesn't get its fair share of funding from philanthropy. And what these national funders are doing is going into small communities, going into small towns, and finding groups that are already bringing people together around projects to improve life in that community, to improve the town itself. One example in Utica, Mississippi, which is this tiny town of about 400 people, a lot of the institutions that make up community there, the things that bring people together, have sort of fallen away in recent years. They've lost factories, they've lost grocery stores, they've lost schools. So what these national funders do, they come into a group called the Mississippi Center for Cultural Production, SIP Culture for short. And what they're doing is helping reinvigorate those community institutions that are such a glue for the community. So they've helped them do a community garden and a community kitchen, in part realizing that they're now a food desert. So they also have established an artist residency, and they're building soon a cultural center. So that's one framework. We're looking at how funders are working externally. Another story I'll point to is an example of how our coverage wants to look internally at what nonprofits are doing in their everyday work to close divides. So the example here is a group in Los Angeles, a community service group. We wrote a story about them a few weeks ago. It's called Big Sunday, great name for a nonprofit. The founder of that group realized very early on that when you bring together teams of volunteers, it represents an opportunity to build community. So he's created an environment, a really fun environment where the emphasis is on as much the experience for the volunteer, getting to know one another, having fun, and then building a shared interest in doing the common good and coming together as a community for that. So those are just a couple of the ways that we're looking at this in both that internal lens and the external lens.
And how can people find out more about the news stories that are coming up? You're posting new content pretty much every week. How's the best way for people to stay on top of that?
There are lots of ways. And since you're on LinkedIn, we'll point to that particularly. We have started a new LinkedIn newsletter. It comes out every Thursday, and it's going to highlight things from the conversation, from the Commons. We'll have these LinkedIn interviews and point to those, some summaries of those conversations. We also have news stories that we put up every day. That's sort of our central point. The website itself is philanthropy.com, the Commons, / the Commons. That's where all of our content lives. It's there. It's meant as a resource for folks to use at any time. And that's where most of our content will live.
That's great. So tell me about this idea for these conversations that we'll be doing this fall. How does that build on the work that you've been doing since we launched the project in April? And mostly we've been doing a lot of stories, but now we're going to bring some of the key players into conversation.
Yeah, I think from the start, our approach has been very typical of journalism in the sense that we go out and report and write about stories. We solicit people to write opinion pieces for us. We've also had some roundtable conversations, but we've realized that through our LinkedIn presence, we have a chance to reach a whole lot of different people and bring some of these leaders, both in philanthropy, the funding space, but also the nonprofit space, bring them directly to you, give them a chance to talk about their work, talk about their ideas, and also to engage with you. So this is an extension of the Commons. All along, we started out with the idea that our work wants to spark conversation. We want to have people talking about these issues well beyond the story that we put out there. So we feel like this is an occasion to extend our purpose, extend our reach, and have more people talking about these issues.
That's terrific.
I know we're moving to the part where we want to preview some of the guests coming up. And Stacy, you are hosting the first guest, and you've been in conversation with her about what you're going to be talking about. So I hope you could share a little about her and what's going to happen.
Absolutely. I'm very excited that next week I'll be talking to Laura Arnold, the co-founder of Arnold Ventures. Some of you may have been following Laura and John Arnold. They've been serious philanthropists for the last 14 years. And one of the things that really distinguishes them in their philanthropy is that they're seeking bipartisan solutions. Everything that they do, they want to make sure that it has a chance of passing. And so they really try to work across the aisle. They fund research and advocacy that seeks to bring people together in ways that move the needle in a range of areas: education, criminal justice, those kinds of things. And I've been watching the Arnolds for a long time, because when they burst on the scene, they were sort of the youngest philanthropist to be in the arena with other Giving Pledge folks. Now they have more experience, and I'm really curious to talk to Laura about what she's learned over these last few years. So we'll talk about that. Because it's election time, we're going to talk about some of the things that Arnold Ventures has been looking at. One of the ideas that they've been pushing is the concept of ranked choice voting, which some of you may have heard about. And it's an idea that is supposed to make elections certainly fairer. And the idea is that when you cast your vote for the person you want most, but you also get a chance to say, if that doesn't work out, here's what my vote would be for the second person. It allows more ideas and more of the people who truly have a lot of support to get in the race, rather than this binary win-lose kind of thing. So we'll talk to Laura about that and some of the other kinds of things that they're backing. And then I'll ask her to talk about some of the areas in criminal justice, for example, where she's made a difference, and the perspective of what other philanthropists can do. So I hope this will be an engaging conversation, both for the nonprofits doing the work who want to better understand how to advance policy changes, and for philanthropists who want to learn what Laura's learned over this period of time. And I'm sure she will welcome other questions that you all have. So please feel free in LinkedIn to send me a note, and I'll add them to my list of things that I'll talk to Laura about next week. Drew, I'd love to hear about some of the people you're going to talk to.
Sure. No, we've got a couple other guests coming up on September 18th. We're going to have a conversation with Layla Zidane. And again, it's election season, but we're coming at this a little bit differently in this conversation. She's a really exciting young leader who is head of a group called Future Caucus. You may know it as Millennial Action Project. It changed its name just a few years ago. Layla makes the case that Gen Z and millennials bring a new style of leadership to elected office. This group has found that young leaders are more likely to be collaborative. They're more likely to reach across the aisle. They're more likely to work in a bipartisan fashion. So what Future Caucus is doing is try to help those leaders, both in Congress, at the state and local level, sort of do that work, help them bring together people around bipartisan issue. The broad principle really, is fascinating in a sense of they think that to change what politics looks like, you need to groom this next generation of leaders who will be the ones who change the landscape. So they're really looking to the future. So it's not a focus on the election of 2024 or 2026, but well beyond to look like elections will look like when these young people come into power. And then on October 2nd, we're going to be having a fun conversation with Eric Bork. Eric is a longtime screenwriter. He's got a very fun backstory. He got his start right out of college with Tom Hanks' production company. And he was your classic intern. He was running errands. He was getting coffee for people. He was making Xerox copies. But he was doing some writing on the side. And one day he managed to get one of the scripts he was writing in front of Tom Hanks. And Hanks liked what he wrote. So he became part of Hanks' writing unit. And he contributed to series like From Earth to the Moon, which is about the Apollo program. And more famously, perhaps, Band of Brothers. And we're talking to Eric about a new movie that he's got coming out this fall. It's called The Elephant in the Room. And it's a romantic comedy about a relationship between a diehard Trump fan and a diehard liberal. And what's really interesting, in a romantic comedy, the couple in question always have challenges to face as they find their way to romance. And in this case, it's political differences. And when Eric was writing the screenplay, he frequently reached out to a lot of the nonprofits that are doing bridging work. So the folks who are trying to bring people together across divides. And what he's doing, he wanted to find some themes about what makes that work to put it into his movie. So he's got that in the movie. He's also gotten a lot of support from Philanthropy. So this is a philanthropy-funded movie that in the end aims to bridge divide. So excited to have Eric on as one of our first guests in the Commons. Stacy, I think we also wanted to talk to you a little bit about some of the coverage we've got coming up in the Chronicle Philanthropy and in the Commons related to the elections.
Absolutely. So this election year offers so many consequential decisions, and everybody in philanthropy is trying to figure out what they should be thinking about and doing. And obviously with a nation that is divided 50-50, you have to think about what could happen no matter what the consequences are, and also state, local, other kinds of elections. It's not just the presidential election that matters so much to what's going to happen on the issues that nonprofits care about. So we'll be looking at what kind of planning work foundations and nonprofits are doing, and we'll do that ahead of the elections. And then, of course, as soon as the election happens, we'll be analyzing what it means for everyone. Again, please let us know what you're seeing, what you're wondering about, what you're hearing about. It will help us do better coverage of what's happening in this campaign season. And Drew, you have some stories that are related to the Commons, especially that are pegged to the election. Can you talk a little bit about those?
Yeah, and I'm working on one right now. I hope my editor is not online here because I'm actually late filing it. But it's been a really fun story. We're taking a look at a range of nonprofit leaders and groups who are trying to make elections more fair, representative, and secure. And what's interesting is that nonprofits have a long history of working in elections. You think about efforts to increase access. You think about efforts to protect voting rights. You think about campaign finance reform and the whole idea of trying to minimize the influence of money in politics. So philanthropy and nonprofits have played key roles in all that. The shift that's happened in the last 4 or 5 years is that polarization has gotten to the point that there's real concern that the voice of average Americans and most Americans is not reflected in vote counts. It's not reflected in who we send to office. So the views of the average American aren't being discussed in the political scene. So what some of these groups and some of these leaders are looking at is structural reform of elections. And when I say structural reform, that means, excuse me, particularly how we're going to vote, how we're going to show up at the ballot box. Stacy mentioned ranked choice voting, a system where people come in, you are allowed to pick 4 or 5 people, candidates as your choice and rank them by choice, first choice, second choice, third choice. That's something that's very active, being pursued by a lot of different groups. There's also something called open primaries, where people can come into a voting booth and choose to vote for either a Republican or a Democrat, regardless of how they're aligned politically. So those are the sort of structural election reforms that are new, that nonprofits are really just now coming on board to work on, and we're going to look at some of those leaders. I think the other thing we'll look at is the political giving of some of the major philanthropists. Obviously, philanthropy has sort of a neutral position in life, but often you find some of these same philanthropists who are funding charity work in various ways, weighing in politics in a different way. So we'll take a look at that later on too.
Those will be fascinating. And, in all of these things, nonprofits play such an important role, not just in election season, but in everything that happens after. So we're, seeing the seeds of things that are going to affect many future elections through the work that many of these nonprofit advocates are doing, funded in part by philanthropy. So lots to tell you all about. I hope that all of you will make sure to stay in touch with what we're doing on the Commons. You can follow us in all of the ways, especially through LinkedIn. We're posting there rather regularly. Please be sure to sign up and join me when I talk to Laura Arnold next week. I'd love to have your ideas for questions, and all thoughts about who we should talk to in this series. Drew and I welcome feedback from all of you. That's one of the reasons we're on LinkedIn, is it will make it easier for us to hear from all of you. So please be in touch. I hope to see all of you next week. And thank you very much for all the attention that you've given this project. We appreciate it. I hope everyone has an excellent day.